Good morning, everyone. My name's Jamie Whitcombe-Jones. I spent the last sort of 15, 20 years in cyber and IT. I was the CISO at Allianz for the last 4 years, but I'm now a free man, so I spent my day moderating these kind of events and trying to avoid having that sore head that I'm pretty sure a few in the room will have. We've got a great panel this morning. What I'll do is, I think these panels, as you would have seen it listed, they always have quite a wordy description. I'll read that to you. It's quite an art, actually, to be able to read some of these. And then I'll go around the panel, get some introductions done, and we'll kick off with a conversation. Really, really welcome input, conversation, questions from the floor. So it will help the next 45 minutes pass much more smoothly if you guys are engaged in a friendly way. So the topic for today's panel is redefining cyber resilience, fortify, adapt, and thrive. Now, that's quite a big topic, so we're going to take it in 3 parts: shifting focus to resilience, preparedness for breach response, and strategic priorities in 2024 around cyber resilience and operational resilience. But before we get into it, if I could just ask the panel to introduce themselves briefly.
Good morning, everyone. Dave Harcourt from BT, Chief Security Authority and BT Fellow. I've been with BT now for 33 years, most of that time looking after security, building security into the stuff that we do, which is kind of my role to focus on secure by design. So I'll be talking a little bit about that as we look about the shift towards preparedness and how we deal with that from a secure by design perspective this morning.
Yeah, good morning everyone. I'm Paul Griffiths. I'm the CISO at Delinean, which is a financial data company. Similarly, I've done security for nearly just short of 30 years now, so done all aspects of it. But first time I've worked for a UK company, most of my experience has been working for American organisations.
And good morning, I'm Matt Woodman. I am the Chief Information Security Officer and Director of Technology Services at UK Research and Innovation. I've been there about 2 years, and we're a public sector organisation that do science and innovation funding as well as big science research. And I've been working in the field for about 17 years now, with various different roles. So.
Thank you very much. So as I said, I'll just read the context. I think it's always useful given it's in the agenda. The increasing importance assigned to resilience by numerous organisations acknowledges the harsh reality that optimal security cannot assure 100% protection. Resilience measures aim to secure operational continuity following a successful breach, and organisations need to be prepared for the prospect of an attack and how they can maintain operations should the worst case scenario arise. So as I say, there's a lot in there to digest. It takes a bit of practice actually to get those words out, but we'll focus on shifting focus to resilience. So that's much more around how do you move from sort of reactive security into the sort of proactive and resilient space. And I guess what would be good to know from the panel as a sort of opening question is, in your collective experience and the current organisations you're in, how are you seeing the prioritisation around shifting towards resilience over reacting to cybersecurity incidents? Please, whoever'd like to.
I think one of the most interesting things that really brings resilience to the fore is how the landscape has changed over the last, especially 24 months. And that's really brought a focus on not just being able to detect incidents or go into an incident management mode, but to be able to look at the life cycle of how we deliver resilience across the organisation. And when we talk about resilience, I think that the shift has really been about maintaining operations rather than recovering from them. And that end-to-end process is really getting us away from thinking about security as the padlocks and the sort of gates and fences to more being about how do we layer appropriate controls at the right point, and really focusing on around the adaptability of security to meet the evolving threat. I think that's quite poignant.
Yeah, I guess for me what I really saw historically is like technology operating in isolation and without that sort of business context. I think even in the sort of governance groups that we had, we tended to have technology governance groups, and we did that in isolation away from the business. We didn't necessarily always understand that sort of business context, the business prioritisation. And for me, that's really been the shift over the last couple of years where, I guess as CISOs, we had to sort of step up and get that sort of business engagement, be able to talk to the business, understand that sort of business context as we go forward. And you make different decisions. What might be you know, if you're looking at risk from just a solely technology point of view, you'll come up to a different view. If you take in all that sort of business context and partner with the business, then that's moving more towards that sort of resilience view, and that you get that sort of greater buy-in, I believe, as your partner in that sort of way.
Yeah, I think to add, I mean, it's I think for a while we've always said that there's no real silver bullet to security. There is no 100% guaranteed answer, right? It's security is a business of risk, and we're all dealing with a world where at some point every organisation is going to get compromised in one way, shape, or form, and it's all about how we ensure that we can manage that. And respond to those sort of things in a way that is sensible, but also making sure that we're thinking about how we build in, the kind of right security model that enables us to minimise impact, because that's the core piece for me as we think about cyber resilience. How do we minimise the impact when those attacks are going to happen? And I'm going to be probably the first to talk about zero trust then, maybe. I've
got a list of
on the panel, you've got a list of buzzwords to tick them off. You've got buzzword bingo. So I think that kind of shift towards the zero trust approach, where we think about reducing blast radius, thinking about capabilities on there that that enable us to effectively contain attacks when attacks happen, so that we can actually reduce that blast radius. That for me is quite key, especially when we think about this kind of ransomware risks. And if anyone's not seen the write-up of the British Library ransomware attacks, I would definitely recommend going and reading it. It's really transparent, and to see how they survived and suffered from the ransomware, and the impact it has on them, but also how they how much of their business continues to run because it wasn't impacted by that issue and outage. The doors were still open, people were still coming into the library when all the systems were down, and they were trying to rebuild everything back from the attack they had. Amazing article, definitely worth reading, and very thought-provoking in terms of the readiness we need to have to kind of be there to survive those sort of things.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. I think a couple of you certainly touched on it, this sort of shift towards resilience rather than moving away from reactive security. In terms of your roles and your organisations, how are you seeing the progression or the shifting of accountabilities and that sort of fine line between operational resilience and cyber resilience?
That's a good question. I mean, I think we've always suffered, I think, from as in the security teams, as CISOs roles, and in an organisation of the expectation that security deals with security. Coming back down to Paul's point really about being close to the business, I think what's really important is to help the organisation understand that security is everyone's responsibility, and actually we're definitely within BT trying to push that clarity of ownership back with the teams who are implementing capability, that whilst we're here from a security team to support them, they're the ones ultimately owning the capabilities for the organisation and having that responsibility to ensure that security is built in. So that and then there becomes a bit of a shared accountability between those areas that are effectively run that part of the organisation. And of course within security, because we run the security operations response to that, we do have a part to play clearly in that security response piece. But that's kind of more shared ownership is kind of important to drive through, and I do think that's starting to get recognised a little bit more than it has historically.
Yeah, I believe the same. I think there's an element of partnering within the business, and I think of it as a jigsaw puzzle or mosaic, where security is one point of it, but without the rest of the picture, it doesn't really make sense. And without the one piece of jigsaw puzzle that is security, it also doesn't finish the picture. So I think that they're not mutually exclusive in the way they perhaps once were conceived to be, and I do think the boundaries are becoming more and more blurred. that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there is a business imperative, and we talked about minimising the impact. And I think Paul talked about understanding the business need and what making the business operate. And as we sort of shift our focus towards being less security focused and more resilience focused, and what that means to organisations, I think it's really, really important that we have one eye on that business driver as well as the impact and minimising that. So I think that's really important in terms of understanding how we go about achieving those things with the business in mind, and that partnership is really, really crucial to delivering that.
Yeah, I guess I agree with what's just been discussed. I think it's all about that sort of shift to operational resilience in the way that you operate, where it's a lot more business-led resilience. Whereas we always thought about that from a technology point of view or from a security point of view. We were more likely to be the leader, I guess, is what it was in the old model. Under the sort of resilience model, it's more of a business-led operational resilience model, where we're very much aligned and just part of the business in the way that we operate. Whereas, wind back 5-10 years, it was like technology does technology stuff, right? And we'll get technology back and the business can worry about their stuff later, right? But I don't think it's that anymore. I think it's very much how do we partner to efficiently restore the business based on prioritisation.
I think it's interesting because we talk about resilience and we tend to think about systems and data resilience. And one of the things that I've been really thinking about recently is the sort of holistic picture of resilience, because it's about people as well, resilient people, resilient teams. And you mentioned the British Library, and I think about the Manchester cyber attack and Helmholtz in Germany, and the tail of these attacks are long, and they take a long time to recover from if you haven't got resilience built into all of your processes across the entire life cycle. I think that means you need to think about resilience of people and teams and the way processes work, and it's the resilience of the process as well as just the technology and being able to get data back. So it's like, I think our shift towards resilience is slightly more holistic, and when you're thinking of it in that way, you need the business to take a level of ownership and think about operational resilience more as a more encompassing thing than just one element of security, whatever it might be. As businesses have become more and more digitally enabled and become digitized, and the organization understands things better, it means we are able to partner in that way with the rest of the organization to be able to make security and make resilience everybody's issue and everybody's opportunity to make sure the business continues to operate. So I think there's a really powerful thing in just thinking about the whole organisation and all the processes, people and technology that bring it up, and thinking about resilience across that entire life cycle.
Yeah, I don't want to labour the point too much. I absolutely agree, and I think you're lucky you have to go back 10 years, because as places I've been, you would only have to go back a couple of weeks. But I guess I would really interested to know if you guys think as an industry, rather than putting you too much on the spot about your own organisations, but just as an industry, do you think we've defined or worked out where accountability for it sits? Because absolutely, it's everyone's problem. It takes all of us to participate in getting this right. Someone ultimately, especially if you've got a regulated business, has got to be accountable for it. I just wondered what your views on where you're seeing it sit, or perhaps where you think it should sit, in terms of, it's lovely that everyone collaborates, but someone's got to take ownership of the topic and be accountable if the worst does happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think, importantly, it has to be driven from the border down, right? Resilience and continuity of the organisation, and therefore, security, cyber resilience of an organisation has to be owned from the top and driven from the top. If it's not, it's never going to get the right focus and drive across the organisation to make things happen. So I think you'll get different organisation models, and I'm not sure there's one right organisation model about where it flows down from the above, because I think what you tend to see, certainly from my experience in the telco industry, is security kind of gets associated with wherever that kind of board ownership tends to sit, exec ownership tends to sit, so that the execution of the security element is tied to that accountable exec from and they can execute on their responsibilities. Because I think that's really key. If you've got security sitting outside of where that accountability sits, it's a weird operating an organisation model. But I don't think there's one specific or necessarily correct answer, because I see security getting associated with chief risk officer roles, or sometimes in the technology roles, sometimes under a CIA role, sometimes under a COO type role, and I think all of those work as long as that senior accountability is recognised, across the board and is supported across the organisation.
You guys seeing the same?
I see it quite fragmented as well. I think it's quite different depending on the organisation. You certainly need the senior level sponsorship from the board, but I increasingly see that it's more decentralised, and you get the CIOs within the individual businesses become, a strong partner for like the CISO type organisation. So I think where it used to be a really simple one that you were just feeding up to, the responsible board member, I think in a resilience model it's holding the COOs accountable within the business, and you become a senior stakeholder to the business as part of that responsibility.
No, I think that's really interesting, and I sort of agree. It is about the COOs are responsible for the operation of the business at the end of the day, and I think there's an interesting dynamic. I also see it as very fragmented, and I think it tends to follow function tends to follow form, unfortunately, with this sort of activity. And I think you tend to get a board member who's interested in security sort of nominate themselves as the security lead, and depending on where their interests lie depends on how that plays out in the organisation. But I do think it's about also managing business risk and the risk, the risk environment in which an organisation operates in. And that tends to define some of the organisational structures and design stuff that might play out in how accountabilities sit across an organisation. I exist in a very federated organisation with 9 different chief operating officers, and they all have their own perception on how this should be managed and how they would want to carry that out for their own business area. And I'm sure that's true of many other organisations. And that means there is a point that we need to really focus on around how does that aggregate up to a single accountable person, and Jamie was speaking to that a second ago. It's a real challenge to really understand, especially in the dynamic environment that we've got, how to best attack it. And I think it's sort of a learn as you go experience at the moment, and I think we're very much in our infancy in learning this sort of new dynamic between how the business operates, how technology operates, and how the two come together to be really, really enabling. And this sort of being adaptive and almost, I second buzzword of the day, being agile. Being agile to be able to meet the emerging trends and understand how the business is evolving itself internally, whilst the landscape externally is evolving too.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. I'll make a bit of a segue towards the second topic, which is preparedness for breach response. So I guess there's a lot more clarity around ownership of response to breaches and than there is around operational and cyber resilience. So in the context of resilience as a topic, has the focus on operational and cyber resilience changed how you go about preparing to respond to a breach if something bad should happen?
Yeah, so I'll dive in and say,
why
you give me a word. I think what's really interesting about response is people think incident management, and that is that sort of acute, immediate action straight after a breach, and that's where all of the sort of focus of security has been. It's put close the gates, seal them with padlocks, and when somebody breaks in, just get the gate closed again, and then don't worry about anything else. And I think the shift to resilience, and I sort of talked about it earlier, this end-to-end thing, it's preventative, it's proactive, but at the same time, it's still planning for the worst case scenario, and not just the day after it happens, but the 6 months following that as well. I think we've really seen that sort of growth of prevent, detect and contain, and then recover, turn into the real life cycle of how we deliver resilience for an organisation. Which I think is both challenging and exciting at the same time, and that big shift of not just thinking to how do we get through to tomorrow, and I talked about human resilience, etc., system resilience, data resilience, and how do we get everything back working, or have the minimum blast area in which something is affected or taken down. And I think that's really, really important in building out how we deliver resilience as organisations for the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's good point. And I think, what's key for me in anything where we talk about preparedness is exercising and understanding what your plans are. And making sure that those kind of what you have as plans and playbooks include some of those the core elements that you need from a resilience recovery perspective, because knowing where your data is, having confidence in your abilities. So we've talked for years about the importance of doing things like backups, right, and testing backups, and how many organisations test their ability to restore from backups and have that ability to survive issues of data loss, because that's one of the core elements of being resilient in the space, is being able to get the organisation up and running, addressing those data issues, being confident that with ransomware attacks on a high, that the organisation's got the ability to respond to those in a fast and efficient way. That enables you to kind of sleep at night a little bit, really, in the challenging world that we're in right now. So I think, for me, absolutely, exercising, ensuring playbooks are there, ensuring that you understand how and understand where some of your capabilities are that will help support you from a resilience perspective in keeping the organisation running, and how you drive that. One of the core things we do as well as exercising is we like to continuously red team and test ourselves and keep our blue team constantly on the edge, responding to seeing issues and detecting what's going on. So it's a constant battle between the two, which keeps the skills and capabilities in blue team available and ready and alert.
Yeah, I just concur. I think with the testing, I think what we used to do, when we weren't focused on resilience so much, was a lot of that sort of technical testing to validate our response capability within the Security Operations Centre. I think where it's changed a little bit more with the focus on resilience is we used to really just report up to the board or to the senior leadership. But I think now with resilience, what we're doing is extending our testing into the business so that we respond with a business rather than responding just bubbling up to the top as we used to under a more historical model. And that's been quite different, right? Because those businesses weren't used to working with us in that sort of way. So there's, a lot of effort certainly had to go in from our organisation's point of view in perhaps doing a lot more simulation and testing than we would have done, because we've got to get these folks up to speed if they're going to be a partner to restore the business as quickly as possible.
I think if I can add, the other really important point, which we've not really touched on so far this morning, but with the shift that every organisation is taking towards cloud, it's the kind of that importance of thinking this through and working through resilience measures through your supply chain as well, because supply chain is becoming much more critical. With the shift to cloud, we're becoming as industries actually far more reliant on cloud capabilities that are actually quite common across the industry, right? So this is not just for individual organisations to think about. It's for us also to think about from an industry perspective on how we address some of the common risks that we face when we are all putting our eggs in common baskets of whether it's one identity service that sits out there and not many of them for doing modern cloud identity, or of course the hyperscaler platforms themselves with your choosing to go down one or choosing to take a hybrid cloud approach of leveraging multiple clouds. We are becoming as more dependent on common capability out there that this becomes quite critical to the sector and to the UK as a whole. And then working through that supply chain to understand that is quite key.
Yeah. Please. Will.
I was just going to say it's really interesting because I was thinking the same, and I think what we talk about resilience, and we sort of it's one of the biggest challenges that we see ahead of us. It's a huge endeavour to undertake to try and make a business truly resilient. I think what we haven't really sort of hammered home yet, and I was just thinking about, how would I grade myself at the moment for my own organisational resilience, and I think it's a question of what do I actually care about, because resilience isn't always keeping everything perfectly running well. It's about keeping it running well enough to succeed and keep the business operating, and sometimes we get those two things mixed up. I think sometimes we focus on everything's got to be perfect rather than everything's got to work in a way that allows the business to continue working. And I think, we're going to talk about it in a few minutes anyway, I'm sure, but if thinking about how you do that and how you find the right balance for resilience is just as important as thinking about how do you get resilience, I think. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had to sort of build on a couple of the points that were made there around, traditionally tabletopping, is a big part of security, and testing parts of your backup usually is, and your recovery response is part of it. In terms of that shift towards working with the business, I know you touched on it around engagement with the business. Are any other members of the panel extending or changing how they do this in terms of, you touched on third-party resilience, for example, so if you're doing a tabletop exercise or if you're doing a simulation, bringing those third parties in, bringing that business in, is it sort of common across the panel that shift's happening, or is it still forming?
I think it's still early days in the way I see it, and I'm definitely seeing some shift towards engaging third parties in incident response. Certainly we have a couple of times actually done exercising that includes into our supply chain as well. And as well as that, there are some broader exercises. I haven't seen many for a number of years actually, because we used to have some coordinated response plans that were thought about almost from a country level. Country exercising on sort of crisis areas. I don't see as much of that these days as we have done historically, but I think I am starting to see a shift towards recognising that if you're not engaging your supply chain, certainly key elements of your supply chain in your exercising, then you're going to miss out when it comes to responding, because they are so critical to that response. I think an organisation's been a bit blinded if you're not thinking about that supply chain engagement as part of preparedness.
We've certainly tested supply chain, and I guess it's not without its challenges, right? Because what you end up with is part of your supply chain trying to trip up another part of your supply chain, so that the testing scenarios are quite spicy, because they are in essence going after each other, because they often compete in similar businesses.
Sometimes internally.
It's different. It's something we all need to get involved in as we go forward. But you shouldn't underestimate the politics associated with doing it. It really is quite different to the normal simulation.
It is.
Yeah, I agree. It's still very embryonic, isn't it, across the entire patch? And I think the focus. When we take the threat into account, that you cannot not have your supply chain involved in how you're going to exercise. I do think there's something to be said for the growth of assurance in that space as well. There's a lot more focus around assurance of the supply chain as well as exercising with the supply chain. I think there's more of a top to bottom picture that we need to build around how supply chains work for an organisation and how we bring them in at the right times, whether it's proactively or in the recovery space. And there's a lot of work to do that in terms of engagement. We talked about the internal engagement with the business and driving that forward, and then the external engagement with supply chains and making that as resilient as possible through both direct dialogue and through exercising and through being part of the planning. So yeah, I think that's really powerful in terms of how you get an organisation to turn from being reactive to being proactive in response to a recovery or an incident.
Absolutely. You mentioned just a minute ago that we'll come on to sort of how you do it, which you've only got 10 minutes to tell us. But
I'll get as many buzzwords as I can.
I guess a reasonably sort of direct or sort of short form question is just in terms of strategic priorities, is operational cyber resilience a strategic priority for each of you this year?
I mean, for us, yes, absolutely. I think in a broader element, I think of a shift. I'm going to talk about zero trust again briefly, but in a broader piece of shifting towards a kind of zero trust paradigm and approach. One of the core things around that is being able to live in a world of compromise. Right, cyber resilience is at the heart of that sort of zero trust paradigm, and that's a big shift that we're certainly making. And have been making. It's not that we're starting, it's a continued journey, because it's not a simple journey. You can't just go and buy it off the shelf, right? It's a cultural shift, education shift, terminology shift that you talk about, as well as think about how you drive that approach of taking what we've all been used to as perimeter orientated controls and kind of bringing them down to each individual server that you've got running as a way of actually reducing that blast radius, enabling the organisation to survive from any individual point of compromise. That journey for an organisation, I mean certainly for an organisation like BT that still runs PSDN network, and I can tell you that PSDN was definitely not designed for a world of zero trust. How we bring that sort of focus into some of those brownfield legacy services and infrastructure that we've got as well is quite a challenge, but certainly a challenge that the organisation is up for driving and seeing through. Our security transformation is a significant program of work that we've got running through BT this year to shift our model and move towards a model that certainly has got more cyber resilience at its heart.
Yeah, I mean, we're a slightly different organisation because we are a cloud-only organisation, but that doesn't detract from, I guess, the priorities that Dave was highlighting. I think, the two main initiatives in this space are around containment with the zero trust type approach, making sure that we really understand what that looks like, and making sure that we've got that sort of resilience in place. But there's also that sort of extending our testing and not, I think we touched on that key point earlier. It's like historically testing as a lot of it's been in-house, or it hasn't been focused on bringing in business partners, or it hasn't been focused in bringing trusted technology partners into the process. That's very much a key testing area for us as we go through this year, because I think it's critical, right? We lull ourselves into that sort of false sense of resilience because we're not really seeing the full picture if we're not careful.
Yeah, and it's definitely a priority for us this year. In fact, for the next 3 years. But it's and it's a journey, isn't it? Like we all acknowledge, we're building cyber resilience. It's not something we're just going to get to the end of and sort of tick and say we did that. Well done us. So I think that's really interesting. The challenge around it being this journey, and people talk about zero trust journeys, which is really really interesting because it is a cultural shift. It's an entire change in how we've thought about things in the past, and it's more, it's got to be more robust. It's got to be more focused on, the entire life cycle rather than just, padlocks and gates. And I think that brings an interesting challenge for all of us because we will all have a world where we want to, and I think Dave mentioned secure by design earlier. We want things to be secure by design for the future, but we're also carrying this massive tail of things that haven't been designed in that way in the past. And it's how do we get the balance between getting resilience right from the start for new things, but also being able to engineering it back in for old, legacy things that we can't just get rid of because that's the nature of the beast. And that's a huge challenge for every organisation at the moment, is understanding where that balance is struck between managing the sort of blast radius of an attack, managing the investment needed, effectively managing risk, and also doing the right thing in the right order, and understanding that at the same time as trying to culturally shift from the way we were to the way we are is a very difficult thing to try and get in synergy and work effectively all the way through. So it's a very difficult act to sort of play out, I think, but definitely a priority.
Absolutely. We've got 5 minutes, and I have got one more question, but any comments or questions from the floor? We can have an awkward moment. Good, thank you. I'll buy you a drink.
So you talked about a lot of stuff that's obviously happening, but what success stories have you had already in the programs that you've got out?
It's a good question. I mean, I think for me, I think one of the core success stories that we have taken and deployed, which has certainly helped us in some of the red teaming elements, is driving through EDR, endpoint detect response across infrastructure, really focused on being able to detect attacks directly on endpoints and then containing those kind of in real time. In an automated way. I think that has been an absolute core element that we've had in place now for 3+ years, and it's been a game changer in terms of dealing with incidents. The first thing our blue team will look at whenever there's a response going on is, have we got our EDR solution on that? If not, let's get it over there quickly, because it'll really help to contain and manage the incident. So EDR tooling, absolutely brilliant, and knowing where it is, knowing what your coverage is, understanding your gaps, and driving that through, tied to some of the real focus we've had on red teaming our infrastructure, and our red teaming activities, full spectrum. It's always on. I said it's constantly keeping our blue team on the hook, and looking for where they're going to pop up next in our infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, we've had success with EDR, but we do it in a layered approach. We don't have a single EDR. We've sadly seen adversaries know that there's not many out there, so they know how to walk past the ones that you've typically got. So unless you've got a layered defence approach, it doesn't really work. And we've had more success with that sort of approach. But I think more of the zero trust has been around identity. We've, as we said, we're very much a cloud-based organisation. So we've really had to focus our efforts on getting tight around identity, so that we really understand our exposure. We're extensive users of SaaS services, and if you don't really have a strong story around identity for SaaS and cloud, you've left the doors open really, and it's not going to end well.
And identity driving towards passwordless as well.
Yeah.
So eradicating passwords. It's all focused on getting rid of passwords entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with the identity, and that's been a big win for us so far. And I think that's created an environment of set the environment for further, exploitation. I think what's been really interesting is as attacks across the landscape have increased, and you never know more than 6 sort of degrees of separation between you and somebody who's been attacked successfully. And I think nothing generates activity and positive activity like knowing your neighbour has been attacked successfully, and that is an opportunity to really build on the success of these things. We've definitely seen that play out, in the research and innovation sector. We talked about the British Library, talked about Helmholtz in Germany, Manchester University. I'm sure you're all aware of that. So the close proximity to a research and innovation sector for us has really drawn the focus on being able to accelerate work, and the identity piece, being able to turn stuff off, which is a resilience tool all of its own, of just not having the thing on in the first place because it's not really needed anymore, has really been helpful over the last sort of 18 months in driving us forward as an organisation.
Brilliant. I think we're at time, I'm afraid. So if I could ask you just to join me in saying thank you to the panels for their time. Brilliant session.